Welcome, everyone. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization Cloud Review, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our Enterprise Cloud Backup and Recovery in 2022 Summit, brought to you by Metallic, Chaosoft, and Acronis. The editorial staff of our respective websites have worked hard to bring together some of the best independent experts for this topic for this event, so we really hope you enjoy it. And before we start today's event with 3 sessions, we do have some announcements. First, we wanted to let you know this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll receive an email when the replay is available, generally within the next few days. Also, each of today's 3 sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A, so please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your console as they come up, so we can get them answered for you by our experts. During today's 3rd session, we will be giving away an iPad Pro with the M1 chip, but you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from our sponsors Metallic, Chaosoft, and Acronis available on the console right now, so please download and check those out. They're underwriting this content. Let's just bring you this summit, so we thank them for sponsoring the summit and supporting the community, and ask you to check out those resources so we can bring you more events in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit, Top Trends in Cloud Backup and Recovery Heading into 2022. This session features Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricon Elite Consulting, and John O'Neill Sr., Chief Technologist for AWS Solutions. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with over 20 years of experience in the IT industry. His background includes data communications networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. John, during his more than 20 years in IT, has worked as a consultant, architect, executive, speaker, and author. He's been involved in multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He has authored material for Thomson Reuters Aspiratory books and exec blueprints, and develops courseware for Pluralsight. It's great to have you here, guys. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, David. It's a pleasure as always. I know that this particular summit is going to be really important for everyone moving into 2022. So once again, thanks for having both John and myself as guest speakers here. All right, we have a lot of content to talk about over the next 60 minutes here. And I think the number one thing that's burning on every executive's mind right now is, are we going to be the next victim of some type of a cyber attack? And, the real question I think that organizations need to ask themselves today is, when we have the event, not if we have the event, is it going to be recoverable? Are we going to be able to survive the next state-sponsored attack? And what's the number one thing that we can do heading into this year? So I didn't leave this till the last slide because it's so important. I wanted to make sure we had enough time for this. But the word immutability, John, we're kind of the old dogs now. We've been around for a while. And, we dealt with this going all the way back in the early days of our careers with, looking at, floppy disks and tapes. We used to be able to punch out the little corner of the tape to make sure that it was write protected. And so I've found that there's a lot of challenges right now with individuals in our industry understanding this new word, immutability. And that's why I relate this. This is going back to the good old tape days where we would punch out that little corner and write protect the thing. It's a little more streamlined from a software-defined perspective. But like, John, what are your thoughts right now on the big event and when it's going to happen for organizations and how they should plan for this? Hey, John, are you there? I think he might be muted.
Hey, Jay, sorry about that. Apparently I don't know how to hit the unmute button. live and learn.
No problem.
So thanks a lot for the intro, David. And as Dave said, I'm really happy to be here. And Dave, to your point on immutability, definitely there seems to be some confusion around the use of that term, but really it's just like you said. It's the same concept as, we used to use with the little piece of tape over the slot on the floppy disk or that kind of thing. We're just making our backup unchangeable, right? So immutable is unchangeable, and we need to do that in a pretty firm way. The one nice thing about the old floppy disks and the notch in the tape and that sort of thing was that it was a hardware barrier. So it doesn't matter if the piece of malware or the virus or whatever was able to overcome software protections because it was a hardware level thing. Same kind of thing when we took a tape and we put it in a safety deposit box, right? It was both off location, so it was unchangeable by a physical event such as fire or flood, but it would also be unchangeable by somebody who wanted to maliciously corrupt it. And we need to take that same approach with today's backups. So we need to make sure that they're well protected against unspecified change. And a lot of what we do to protect them is done through software. And remember, malware is malicious software. It attacks other software. So yes, we believe that our software protections are sufficient, but everybody believes that their operating system is protected or their software is protected right up to the point that it isn't. And so we need to layer our protections to make sure that in the end, our backups are immutable. They are unchangeable to the best degree we can do that. And, Dave, you and I have done this different ways, but, everything from air gapping the backup on the network by automating turning on and turning off of network ports or firewalling between them, putting it up in cloud storage and separating it from the primary resources in the tenant, all sorts of different strategies like that. And I definitely know you have some ideas on different strategies too, based on what we've worked on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the big piece here comes with, not just immutability, but also the tiering of your data as well. And when we tier this data, I want it to float across different immutable form factors as well. And to me, I look at this, and this is kind of coming back full circle again from when I first worked in IT, where, the tape backups were the prevalent way of taking and doing things. Are we coming back to the age where, maybe we're going to be looking at some type of tape backups again? We worked so hard to get away from that. And lo and behold, that strategy was actually pretty good, robust, and solid. Tape medium itself has its own challenges, but at the end of the day, that seems to be kind of where we're heading. So from a software-defined perspective and a modern backup for 2022, I don't see many organizations heading back down that road, but what I do see is a tiering system where, where we take our primary backups that we have and we immediately sync and mirror those over to some type of immutable storage. So, you can't just overwrite it. Because one of the things you have to understand, and, I know we're spending a bit of time on this particular slide here, is the fact that threat actors are out there today. Many of you have probably already been the victim of some type of a cyber or malware ransomware type attack. And the threat actors are actually actively looking for backup targets that are not protected. They're not immutable, that they can gain access to. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to hit the shift delete button on those particular backup targets to wipe them, because it removes the ability for you to be able to recover. So if you're not looking at that immutability right now, immutability is something that's going to be really key for you kind of moving into the future here. And so, John, we actually have a question, more of a comment that came in from David. So, David, thank you very much for participating in the webinar here today. And it says basically it would be better off to have offline disks rather than tapes. And so that is definitely a good way of air gapping that. You want to make sure that you're having that inside of a lockbox or somewhere off the network. Don't just leave that device plugged in. And so David makes a very good point, offline disks. So even if it's an external USB drive, because you can get massive sized drives now, make sure that that thing's actually unplugged. Make sure that the network port that it's plugging in, if it's a NAS device, is turned off. Just make sure that nobody can get it. It's a way of air gapping it as well, and another way of making it immutable. So great question there. All right. Okay, so that leads into the next point that we have here that I was kind of starting with, John, which was scalability to the cloud. One of the things that John and I have found heading through 2021 was the supply chain crisis that we're facing right now from a hardware perspective is making it very, very problematic to even get hardware into our data centers. So let's say, for example, your backup targets that you have are filling on-prem, and you know that you need to expand them, and you need to buy some additional drives. Well, it might not be as simple as just calling up your vendor of choice and saying, okay, I'd like to order another 20 drives, and I'd like to have them here tomorrow. That could be a 1, 2, 3, 4 month delay on getting that hardware. And so that becomes very problematic. And so one of the things that I think you have to think about next, along with immutability, heading into 2022, is looking to scale to the cloud. And so I'm not saying necessarily move all of your backups up to the cloud, but scaling and tiering up to the cloud just makes an awful lot of sense, because we're not necessarily in the data center business. We're in the business of, running our organizations, and scaling that type of storage up to the cloud just makes an awful lot of sense. What are your thoughts, John, on kind of, taking and scaling and tiering some of these backups up to the cloud?
Well, thanks, Dave. Absolutely, the cloud is a kick-in resource for this type of thing. And, talking a little bit about tiering, I want everybody to think about tiering from multiple perspectives. And one that I don't want to get lost is tiering allows you also to protect your valuable time. You have limited time and resources as an IT pro. You're faced with many challenges and tasks and such in a day. So just looking at everything as flat as far as importance and criticality goes, you now have to suck up a whole lot of time, the same amount of time for the secretary's PST file as you do for the manufacturing system that drives production, and that doesn't make sense. So if you tier that data and you understand the data you have, and you say, hey, we're going to focus our resources on 100% guaranteeing that that manufacturing data is within its RPO and its RTO, and then you tier that down and back from there, you can then make sure that your resources, your most important resource, your time, is spent on those critical things and the less critical. And that also reduces the costs associated, because when it's flat, it costs the same to protect that PST as it does that critical manufacturing data. When you tier it, you can devote the expensive resources to the expensive or highly valuable data, and then move down from there. Same thing applies when we tier it up to the cloud. We need to get it up to the cloud, or Dave, you and I have run into it where we got to get it back from the cloud. And I know we have some slides to talk about that. But if you don't tier the data, your backup or recovery time could be significantly elongated by the fact that you've got that 20 gig zip file with people's personal pictures coming out of their company folder that's stalling the entire backup. Whereas if you tier, you can again make sure that critical stuff gets backed up and offloaded to the cloud much faster. And as we talked about with offline, you can do a lot of things in terms of bringing them offline or unavailable to the normal production workloads to get back to that immutability concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one kind of final piece with this is the fact that most modern backup vendors today, inside of their user interface, their UI for their backup tools, fully support scaling to the cloud right as part of their UI. So it's not something that you have to necessarily go and develop a custom or third-party solution for to start using some of that cloud and tiered storage. They probably already have tiering solutions available. So just talk to your favorite backup vendor and ask them if this is a possibility, because it may be as simple as you going into your tenant inside of your cloud provider of your choice and just configuring some storage, some cloud storage, some blob storage up there, or some blocks that are available for you to actually store this, right? So it's not actually that hard to get started with this. And what I love about it is just that instant scalability where we don't have to wait for the supply chain. So, all right. Number 3 here, John, is that cyber events has happened, all right? So let's do a little bit of role playing. And unfortunately, I really apologize for our listeners that are on the call here today if what I'm going to talk about is going to trigger a PTSD event for you, because many of you have probably had a situation over the last 1 to 2 years where you've had some type of a cyber event. So I do apologize for that in advance. But as part of our little role-playing scenario here, John, the one Monday morning phone call has come in now, and you've had some type of a cyber event. File servers are not responding. The network shares are offline. You're getting sporadic reports that weird documents have been printed and ransom notes are printed and sitting on the printers here. And it looks like they've taken you out. You're in a full-blown ransomware scenario. And with that being said, what are some of the options to bring that business back online in the most expedited fashion? Because one of the problems that I know that we're going to face here is wondering how deep did the bad guys really get in? So just because you have the ability now to press the restore or the recover button, you may be recovering that into what I'll consider a hostile environment, because if that threat actor is still there, they probably have agents that are living and command and control devices that are out there on the network that have taken over workstations and are just waiting for new things to pop back in. And as soon as they pop back in, they're just going to get re-ransomed again. So we have to make sure that we kind of sanitize and purge that environment. So in this aspect, is recovery to the cloud viable for most organizations, John?
Absolutely, and it's one of the things that I suggest very frequently is that locations who have never been able to afford the concept of a hot site, right, that data center that you keep ready to roll. Now, conventionally, that meant you had desks and you had computers and all that kind of thing. Well, with the cloud, we don't need that because it's a virtual office space. And it allows us to have a hot site where we can do recovery directly to the cloud very fast, particularly if we're restoring backups that are already in the cloud, and that we can have things such as virtual desktops and other servers, networks, even firewalls and network security groups and all those things configured and up and running in minutes and hours rather than days and weeks. And that could be a huge difference to mitigating the financial and relationship impact, the destruction that malware reaps. I mean, Dave, you've heard me talk about that before, that malware destroys, and I put a period right at the end of that. And a lot of people just think I mean they destroy data, right, or whatever. And no, they destroy confidence, the confidence of your customer and your partners, right, in your ability to protect their data and their operations. Because if you're a distribution company and you're moving product and your customer expects you to have that product to them today, but you can't dispatch your trucks or print bills of lading or do anything else, so now they don't get their product for a few days late, that's a big deal to them, and it's going to make them question their confidence in selecting you for future contracts and that kind of thing. Confidence, it destroys confidence of your employees, because it may impact your ability to direct deposit their paychecks on time, and now they're hurting. Or you may have to temporarily lay them off because you can't afford to pay 1,000 people while they're not producing revenue. So, malware destroys. And the faster you can counter that destruction, the more you can mitigate it. And that seems like common sense, but it really needs to be stated, because if you can restore directly to the cloud, recover directly to the cloud, and get up and running, you minimize that impact to your customer, your partner, your employees, and their confidence. It might be shaken a little bit, but it's certainly not going to take the big hit that a multi-day or week outage would give you. And the costs of being able to recover to the cloud are so much different and much less than the conventional hot site that you get the best of both worlds. You get cheap and you get fully functional.
All right, John, we've actually got another great comment that just came in from David. And David, thank you very much for posting this. And I actually want to kind of read this a little bit verbatim for what he's posted in here, because I think it's so relevant. Because his comment here is really good. Let me read it. Recovery to the cloud is a tricky discussion because tailback can be difficult, and running infrastructure in the cloud like its on-prem data center is far more costly than a properly engineered solution in the cloud. So recovery to the cloud needs to be temporary with an exit strategy. Otherwise, costs could be crippling. What a fantastic point. Absolutely. And so that's actually a point, and I'll take the answer for this one here, John. Is David, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. And this is where, as part of your DR playbook, you need to make a decision whether failover to the cloud is going to be permanent or temporary. And so I think that decision needs to be made depending on how long it's going to take to kind of flatten and reload and wipe everything. And absolutely, you definitely want to have the big red button to go back on-prem. Most modern DR solutions, when you go to fail over to the cloud, have the ability, especially if you're replicating infrastructure up there, have the ability to fail over. And then there's a second portion of that, which is committing or failing back to production. So most do have a failback option from what I've seen.
Dave, I do want to throw in that it's important when we talk about this, and David's spot on, but we need to add into that discussion, what is it we're recovering from? Because recovery to the cloud for an event such as property damage, fire, flood, that kind of thing, is very different than recovery to the cloud based on a malware event. Because I see, unfortunately, week in and week out, companies that don't survive the devastation that the malware reaps. And it has nothing to do with the ongoing cost of operations. It has to do with that they can't survive when they lose 60% of their customer base in a short order or that kind of thing. So most of those scenarios, it's literally they're drowning. So anything that gives them the chance to survive is better than surefire loss. And it's a question of tiering, and it needs to be tiered with the business, not in IT. It's a discussion with the business. It integrates with business continuity planning and different things. And the business needs to decide what level of impact they can tolerate, and they need to define that. So IT is simply the implementer. We're simply following the business's guidance and the business's rules on what we need to do to give us the best shot of survival, whatever the type of disaster.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And David, and to the rest of our listeners that are out there, John and I love to make these sessions interactive. So if you've got burning topics that you want to discuss, we'll try our very best to get to as many of these questions as we can throughout the session here today. So thank you very much for kind of making this interactive. Okay, so now the next thing is we're in that scenario, John, where, we have failed over to the cloud. And so I think that there's some really important networking concepts for everyone to understand here, is that I'm a Microsoft person through and through, so I understand Microsoft Cloud and networking very well. And in the Microsoft world, we have two types of network traffic that comes inbound into our tenant or outbound out of our tenant. And so we call that ingress for inbound traffic or egress for outbound traffic. The important point here is that, it's kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet sending all of your data into the cloud. They're not going to charge you to ingest all of that data, but what they will do is they'll charge you on an outbound to pull your data out. So in the event that we have to hit that big red button, as mentioned in the previous slide, and we want to fail back over to production, there is a cost from a networking perspective to pull your data back out of the tenant. And one of the big things here is that in the event of an emergency, let's say you did have to declare an emergency, and I know, John, that we've had to go through this with customers before, is where, you're in that ransomware event, make sure that you're calling your ISP, your service provider, because there's quite likely a possibility that you could get a speed bump on your service with just a software switch versus actually having to physically go bring out new hardware, routers, devices, things like that. And they'll temporarily bump you up because like, hey, I've got an emergency. We've been cyber attack here and, we're in crisis mode. Can you please bump our pipe from 100 meg to a gig link? The last 2 times I've had to make that phone call, it's been less than 60 minutes. Got the phone call back. Okay, try it now. Sure enough, 10x the speed. How long can we keep it for? Keep it for as long as you need. We're actually not even going to charge you for it. Just get your business back up and running. And I can't speak to the ISPs for what they would do. It's just that's been the experience that we've had. They've been so helpful trying to get our businesses back online, John.
Hey, Dave, absolutely. And Thomas put in, boy, they will charge you. And that's my suggestion with that is develop in advance a great relationship with your ISP. Understand who your account executive is there. Talk to them. Let them understand your business. Make them a partner, not just a vendor. Dave, we've been involved in over 24 events just in the last 6 to 8 months, and over 80% of those where we asked for a speed bump, we were able to get without any charge. And these are, in most cases, fiber connections where they use an on-premise switch and a remote switch, and they're just bandwidth limited at the ISP. And as you said, Dave, you call in and you have a conversation, and because we've had a relationship in most of those cases, they were like, hey, we want to help you. We understand you've got enough stress going on. We don't want bandwidth to be a stress. Here you go. We're gonna cover that. And they were able to do that. Now, if your provider, from our experience, if they want to be, sticky about it and charge you extra, again, it goes to that looking at it in a total of what is it costing you to be down kind of thing. You can make a decision of whether it's worth it to pay for that. But, Dave, we've been very, very blessed in that in the events where we've had to call and ask for it, they've been very forthcoming, and they haven't stuck us with big bills at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Thomas had one more comment in there that I think is just so relevant to this discussion. And he's saying so many organizations do fail over tests, but do not fail back. So they're only performing half the job. And you really nailed it there, Thomas. That's such a great point. If you only do fail over tests and you don't fail back, you're doing migrations. You're not actually doing a DR test. A DR test means test it in DR and then bring it back, replicate that data back, and run it live over in DR as well. It's not just a matter of turning on that VM. You actually have to run those workloads over there.
Remember what the Romans said, Dave, practice like war so that war is like practice. And a DR event is exactly like that. You want to have practiced it such that it is just a methodical response.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Now, what if we did decide, though, that going through one of these events, that maybe some of those workloads do belong in the cloud? What would be some of the options there to keep that there and make it sustainable? So we've got different options to kind of extend connectivity to our cloud tenants, which is maybe, we could set up a VPN, which is pretty straightforward, get that set up pretty quickly. Maybe you've got an existing MPLS network and you want to extend that out, and how we would traditionally extend that MPLS network out to the cloud from a Microsoft perspective would be creating an express route. The express route is basically just a dedicated connection into Microsoft's data centers. And for me, these backhaul links are going to be key for your overall design of the solution, because you may decide that maybe cloud is a better place for some of these things to go. And, maybe after we are recovering up to the cloud, it is 2022, maybe some of these things do belong in the cloud. So maybe it gives us an opportunity to do that. So investigate those. So for part of your 2022 playlist that you have, and things that you want to check out in regards to your cloud backup and recovery solutions, see what dedicated connectivity options are actually going to cost you. If you haven't had a chance to price it out, maybe it's something that you want to look at. What do you think? What do you think about that, John?
Well, what I was going to throw out is from a connectivity standpoint, one of the discussions that we often have, and when we go into organizations, is that the pandemic has really put most, in fact, of what we're dealing with, organizations into a point where their users are effectively using a cloud. It's private, but they're coming in for remote work, so they're coming across remote links with limited bandwidth and accessing resources and everything else. And if they're able to do that into your private data center, then the concept of putting them into a public data center or public cloud becomes easier, because you've kind of vetted out that the application will support it or whatnot, the minimum requirements and that sort of thing. So you can make that change a lot easier. And it's, interesting that pre-pandemic, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations were, no, we can't tolerate or we can't support having an abundance of users remote working and that sort of thing. And now, in the middle of the pandemic, we have many organizations that made that statement 3 years ago that now have 50% of their users working remotely. And that greatly changes the amount of testing and viability concept proving that you need to do to prove whether they would run in the cloud.
Well, and just finishing up the running these workloads in the cloud, if we are going to recover them up there, two big things for me with the networking discussion that we've had here, just in regards to networking and configuring everything properly up in your cloud tenants. Number one is you get some very big extended benefits of moving some of those workloads to the cloud, in that, looking at global load balancing or load balancing in general becomes very straightforward for your applications up there, because, for example, in the Microsoft sense, you can use Azure Traffic Manager. Now you can actually take and you can start rotating some of that traffic to and from your cloud tenants. And in regards to DR and failover to the cloud, I want you to think about this for your application servers. Let's say that you run a tier of IIS web servers and they connect to some type of a SQL database. Well, if we have this backhaul connectivity to the cloud, one of the things that we could do is we could actually throw some of those IIS instances up into our cloud tenant. And then we can use something like Azure Traffic Manager to load balance that traffic. And so for some of the synthetic tests that you want to do, redirecting some of that external traffic, we can now redirect that at a global load balancing level over to our cloud IIS servers and just do tests that way and run those as primary or add them into the load balancing pool. Just so many options available when we look at, extending that hybrid play into the cloud, especially failing over. It all still needs to be backed up and protected, but, it's what it is. Okay, the next one here, John, cloud compliance and data sovereignty. This is an issue depending on where in the world you're listening from right now, because data sovereignty basically means that, you have specific places that you can store that data, and you can't necessarily store that outside of your geographical locations. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for you. So you need to make sure that when you're configuring your tenant and where you're storing that data and your backup data, for example, you want to make sure that that's going into a region that's supported for you. And so make sure that you're not violating any data sovereignty rules depending on who your organization is that you're working on. And for me, one of the big pieces here is that I think 2022 is going to bring the biggest wave of backup data that's going to be pushed into the cloud in history. I think that we're just going to see this continue to grow this year. So, John, what are kind of your thoughts on, choosing the right regions and, making sure that you're smart with selecting where your backup data is actually going to go?
So this is huge, Dave, and that's why I'm so glad that we put some pro tip in here on this, because, I spend a lot of my time in cyber insurance realms, cybersecurity realms, and we are in an era where claims against those types of policies have exceeded the claims for conventional property policies. So being able to maintain that insurance has become a critical requirement issued by many organizations, boards of directors, their C-suite, that sort of thing. And, unfortunately, what we've seen is that, of course, when things are humming along nicely, they just are constantly putting pressure on IT for don't interrupt us, don't spend the money, and don't do these other kind of things. Well, IT needs to speak up and be very transparent about what they can do and what they can protect against and what they can't. Because when an event happens and the insurance carrier says, well, we're not going to pay out on this claim because of you have an unsupported operating system out there connected to your network, or because of this or because of that, we've seen the organization holds IT accountable for not making them aware of that. So because of that, I'm right with you on the migration to doing the things and taking advantage of the unique resources provided by the cloud will hit an all-time high in the coming year for exactly the reason we put there. Complete and utter fear of cyber attacks and ransomware. I mean, I want everybody just a factual event. So this is a recollection of an event, not a fictional story. Dave, you and I were involved right before the Christmas holiday with a company that was ransomware completely shut down. The ransom itself was over $4 million. The impact to the company exceeded $10 million. And what was haunting for me is this is right before the Christmas holiday, and a lot of hundreds of employees were sent and told, hey, your paycheck isn't going to hit because the direct deposit system is locked out and we can't get to it. We can't produce enough manual checks. So they found a way to get money as quick as they could, but these people were, if they had planned to buy that last minute Christmas gift, didn't happen. If they needed it to get their meals ready, didn't happen. And, as an IT professional, that haunts me, because I want to be able to look the people that we protect through our enterprise backup and recovery solutions. I want to be able to look them in the eye and not say that, hey, we're never going to get attacked, we're never going to get an event. But I want to be able to say that, we did everything in our power to be transparent, to put the protections in place, to engage resources in design, and we're here to help you work through this, right? But that kind of impact and that kind of expense is just going to continue to force organizations to look for these out-of-box solutions, such as backup and recovery using cloud resources.
Well, and back to my point that I made earlier about supply chain constraints, To say that we're not going to protect the organization and we're not going to back up because we're waiting on shipments of backup targets to come into our on-prem data center is not really a viable solution either. So we've got to look at whatever measures are available to us right now and, move forward with those plans, because I don't see the supply chain constraints fixing themselves anytime soon. So that's the beauty of cloud storage, is that you can have it and it can be almost instant on for you, John.
And Dave, that's such a great thing. I mean, the analogy I tell people is that when your boat's on fire, regardless of why you couldn't buy the fire extinguisher, you couldn't get it delivered or whatever, no one cares. The boat's on fire. So,
yeah.
If you can't get the fire extinguisher, finding some other solution to have ready for when it happens is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now to the next topic here, John, platform support. And so when we're looking at cloud backup and recovery, typically there's either cloud to cloud or there's on-prem to cloud. And for this one here for me is more an on-prem to cloud-based recovery. And so with that solution, as we look forward and we look into the crystal ball for 2022 and what this is going to hold for us, there are still many organizations out there that run physical workloads, John, believe it or not. And so we still have concerns about how we're going to back up, how we're going to replicate, how we're going to fail over all of that infrastructure as well. So one of the pieces of advice that I have is when you're looking at solutions around this, make sure that your solutions are cross-platform compatible. The cross-hypervisor, they can support cross-hypervisors, physical backups, and as well as the ability to convert those physical servers into virtual in the event that you do need to fail over. These are still things that are definite requirements, especially as we're failing over and we're looking at, running some of this stuff in the cloud, or we're looking at that as a storage placement area. That one's going to be really key for us. All right. Oh, this slide here is totally all you, John. The low-hanging fruit. What exactly do we mean by this? And I'll just leave it like this. Once again, I like to tell stories when we do this, and John and I were working through an incident this summer, and we had a cyber insurance specialist that came in. It was one of the guys that came in as what's called a recovery specialist, right? Remember that organization, John? And they said, "Oh yeah, this is the Revel ransomware strain." This was when we were doing those Kaseya recoveries. And they're like, "Oh, this is the Revel ransomware strain. Check out this INI file that it uses." So it uses a .ini file that controls what it is it's going to do. And one of the things that was in there is it has a section in there that was hunting for backup targets. So if it was like if the word backup is in the folder structure, just delete it. So if you had a folder called C drive backups, shift delete it as part of the tooling for the Revel ransomware strain. It wasn't even going to try to encrypt it. It was just going to delete it. And so that was a real eye-opener that, that those types of attacks are just, like that to me, John, is not sophisticated. That's just plain simple kind of good warfare by the bad guys. Like, why do I want to let you have backups? Because then you're just going to recover. I'm not going to make any money like that. And so anyways, what are some of the other ones that people should look at for some of the low-hanging fruits?
Well, Dave, one of the big ones that you and I see a lot is that because of the demands on IT pros and because that they're pointed at so many things, backups aren't the squeaky wheel until they are. And as ridiculous as that sounds, it's what I see. Day in and day out, IT pros are challenged with, hey, we need to get this system that's supporting our, healthcare EMR or, a machine in the back end or whatever. And okay, I'll defer working on the backup target here for a bit, and I'll focus on that. Until you have a DR event, And then they want to know why your backups aren't perfect. Well, they're not perfect because I had to keep postponing working on them, and I kind of just duct taped and WD-40'd them. And, I made things move that wouldn't move and things stop that were moving too often, kind of thing. But I never really devoted the care and feeding that they needed. So we need to, as IT pros, make sure that our business, that our management, our stakeholders understand that, as the quote you put there, backups are as much production as anything else in production. I'll leave it at that one so we can move on to the next slide, because I know we're getting kind of behind here.
Yeah, and no, for sure. And just one more piece that I want is that more than one case I've seen threat actors actually do nothing more than look to steal a backup of a domain controller, because typically those backups are very small. They will take that offline, especially if that backup wasn't encrypted. They will exfiltrate that backup, crack it offline. They will fire up a copy of your ntds.dit Active Directory database, and they will sit there and they will work to crack that for an infinite amount of time. So just as a heads up, making sure that you're encrypting your own backup targets is important. So you have a separate key so that if they do get access, they can't just simply ship that off and do that. And yes, backups are just as much as production is production. That's why I'm going to say that again. Because they need the same type of care and feeding as production environment. All right, so the last kind of official slide that we'll have, and then we'll go into a couple questions that we've kind of had preloaded in here. Cloud outages, John. So now all of a sudden you've made this huge investment in the cloud. We're running workloads up there. We have our backups running up there. It's 2022, and we've got a plan to continue our hybrid approach and moving things up to the cloud. Just because you move it up to the cloud guarantee you 100% availability? Is that true? Like you just instantly get 100% availability if you go to the cloud, or can you have outages in the cloud?
You can absolutely have outages in the cloud, and the statement I use to everybody is, one we've all heard throughout our lives. Nothing in life is guaranteed. Have a backup plan.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's take a look at a couple of our pro tips that we've got that we'll finish up with here, John. Pro tip for everyone listening here is you do not want to store backup data in a folder with the word backup in it. That was that Revel ransomware strain that I was talking about. Remember, threat actors are out there. They're looking to make your life extremely difficult. Their single goal when looking at a ransomware, and I think we have to really just take a step back from this for a second, John, because you and I had this conversation earlier this morning, and I thought it was actually really relevant to this presentation. There's two different types of mentality for the threat actors out there. There's the organized crime, and the organized crime is in this for a business, John. They want to take and they want to make your life difficult, but they don't want to end your business. They want to make you pay a penalty for having poor security practices, but they don't want to necessarily end your business. You pay, you get your data back. It's ransom, right? The second part of this is, I want to bring you to the end of days. I want to take every piece of infrastructure that you have, and I want to destroy it. I want to maliciously take your business, and I want to wipe it off the face of this earth. So it's a totally different approach. I don't even want money. I'm just going to take you out. And so what would be that latter? To me, that's some type of a cyber warfare, state-sponsored attack. We all know what's going on in the news right now. That would inflict so much pain. Could you imagine the pipeline not being ransomed, but actually being flattened, all infrastructure gone? The hospital not being ransomed, where there's a chance to pay a ransom and get key critical systems back up and running, flattened. There's no ask for money, a monetary sum to fix this. It's just you have nothing. And so it's really important that you think about that latter scenario right now, because everybody's so scared about ransom. How about somebody coming in and just nuking your infrastructure? Because that is a possibility as well. So,
well, David, I'll just jump in. Sorry for cutting you off, but you're absolutely right, and that's the one that I actually worry about more right now. Is the state-sponsored ransomware, because remember, its whole goal is simply to disrupt and destroy. And these are the ones that are covered by countries. And I want everybody to think about this. Just this past week, so the FBI was giving a presentation on the west coast of the USA and laid out quite convincing data that shows that China has concerted cyber efforts going on right now to simply disrupt and slow U.S. economy growth, that sort of thing. Okay, so they're not targeted at getting any recovery; they're just targeted at disrupting, and so that means that malware is going to target everything from financial to healthcare to manufacturing to distribution, anything, agriculture even. The other is just again this week, Department of Homeland Security, again U.S. based, issued a alert that it is expected that if things continue to escalate with the Russian-Ukraine situation, that the U.S. can see a significant sudden increase in Russian-sponsored cyber attacks against U.S. entities. Again, the goal won't be to extract monetary benefit. It will simply be to disrupt and destroy exactly what you were talking about, Dave, right? And so these are two very large security-oriented agencies in the U.S. that are making recommendations just this week about the very type of end-of-days kind of malware that you talked about.
Yeah, and going back to slide number 1, immutability. If you don't have an immutable backup, get one today. Even if it's an external drive that you're backing up your data to, put it in a lockbox, because trust me, even if you have to go back to a week or a month's old data, it's better than nothing. You'll deal with it. You'll deal with data entry. You'll deal with the customer impact. You'll deal with all of those pieces. It's better than nothing, okay? So make sure that that's number 1 on your list. Okay, so we were talking a little bit about protecting the backup targets here as well. Make sure that you secure your backup targets in the same way that you secure production. Because why, John? Because backups are just as much production as production. You need to protect them with exactly the same advanced persistent threat protection technologies that you have on any of your production servers that are out there. Remember that data is gold to the bad guys out there, so make sure that you're protecting those things. All right, this will be the last one that we'll do here, John. Gearing up to the cloud. Remember, we talked about this here, the supply chain issues. I'll give you a scenario, John. We'll walk through this with everyone, and then that's where we'll wrap up. We'll actually wrap up right on time. This is strange because normally we like to go overtime. You have a job, John. Your backup targets are filling up on-prem, and you pull the trigger on the order, and to your surprise, it's going to be a 120-day wait for that infrastructure. Are you going to go to the executive and your board of directors and say, we're actually without protection for the next 120 days because we're waiting on hardware? Or are you going to take a look at some cloud tiering options or even just cloud backup options that you've got?
I just want to actually kind of step back and give an example to supply chain constraints. We have a situation where we ordered some switches for some new construction in June of 2021. They arrived last week. So, if anyone believes that, hey, I'm going to be able to, replace a failed switch by just ordering something, you may be able to, but it may not be the model or even make that you're used to. So now all of a sudden you have loads of people that are experts in, the interfaces and software for one vendor's switch, and now you've got to learn somebody else's because it's the only thing you could pick up, and you had an entire network segment that was down. So you need to incorporate, as we've been talking about throughout, Dave, and you've mentioned so many times for good reason, we need to incorporate planning for that physical set of limitations throughout our backup and recovery design.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think we're finished pretty close to on time here. We have time to take a quick little break, and we're going to hand it over to our esteemed colleague, the driving force behind Virtualization Cloud Review, Mr. David Rammel.
Okay, thank you very much, and great job, guys. And you're coming back, so just hang on. Everyone else, stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day, Expert Best Practices for Cloud Backup and Recovery. Dave and John will be back for that session, moderated by the esteemed John K. Waters, the driving force behind our editorial efforts. So take this chance to check out those resources on your console provided by Metallic, Chaosoft, and Akonis, and we'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Enterprise Cloud Backup and Recovery Summit. Thanks again to our sponsors, Metallic, Chaosoft, and Akonis, for making this event possible, and thanks to you for joining us for this second awesome session. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your moderator for this information-packed session. Just a quick reminder, this session will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout this session. We'll do our very best to get to all of them. And at the end of our third session, one lucky attendee will be receiving an iPad Pro with the M1 chip. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. Now let's get started with our second session, Expert Best Practices for Cloud Backup and Recovery, with our dynamic duo, Dave Kawula and John O'Neill Sr. Dave, as those of you know who attended our first session, is Managing Principal Consultant at Tricoin Elite Consulting. He's a Microsoft MVP with more than 2 decades of experience in the IT industry. His background includes data communications networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. John is Chief Technologist at AWS Solutions. In his 2 decades in IT, he has held roles ranging from software architect to senior executive, consultant to author. He's been involved in multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He's developed technology training coursework for Pluralsight, and he's authored material for both Thomas Reuters' Aspitor books and Exec Blueprints. You are in for another awesome session. Take it away, Dave and John.
Awesome. Thank you for the warm introduction there, John. As always, really appreciate that. Once again, John and myself, we really love to be interactive with these sessions. So if you have any burning questions at all, feel free to use your Q&A panel. We'll get to absolutely as many as we can during the session. All right. So our summit that we have for Enterprise Cloud Backup and Recovery in 2022, this second half, the second presentation is going to focus on kind of the expert tips that we have for you for cloud backup and recovery. And so the first one that really comes to mind for me is business continuity and disaster recovery plans. They're 2 different components of kind of the same artifact that we have for our organizations. To me, the business continuity plan has to really be driven by the business. It has to be something that has 100% business involvement in. And then the recovery plan is more of the technical aspect of this. And so when we look at backup and recovery and business continuity plans, I think that we have to look at two different components, which is, recovery to the cloud and backup to the cloud. But as, we had a good point in the last session from one of the questions, not just about recovery or backup to the cloud. Are you going to stay there? Is it going to be permanent? Or am I going to fail back? And if you are going to fail back, make sure that you're testing that. So, John, what are your thoughts on kind of business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans heading into 2022 here?
So, Dave, thanks. As a CISO, of course, I spend a lot of time on this and communicating it with the C-suite and boards. And it really is, the way that I describe it is the disaster recovery scheme or solution, plan, whatever you want to call it, is what IT is doing after a disaster to restore operations to normal. But that takes time, right? It's not instantaneous. So during that time, what does the business do to mitigate losses, to get operations continuing in any form they can? Okay, so how do we keep servicing customers? How do we keep producing parts? How do we keep doing quality operations? How do we keep accounting, processing things when, we don't have computer systems? And so that, like you said, Dave, is what the business is doing while IT is doing their DR stuff. Okay, so IT is typically not part of activating or implementing the business continuity plan. That's what the business is doing. So it's important that IT be involved in the design of the business continuity plan, because how can the business define what they're going to do and how they're going to do it if they don't understand how long they might need to do it, right? What the DR operations are going to look like, how long they're going to take, what they're going to involve, that sort of thing, from cloud costs or whatever. So, it's important that they be involved, but that they really involve the business too. And don't just involve, one or two components of the business. Think about your organization and what it does and what it needs to do to continue to operate, and involve all those areas. So if you have a quality department, you should have a business continuity plan for how quality continues to operate. If you have a marketing department, a shipping department, look at those, because the individual department level business continuity plans are what combine to form the organizational level business continuity plan. And Dave, as you said, everyone should look at all the out-of-box solutions that they can think of. So, leverage those cloud resources. Maybe you can temporarily turn on some services or some software as a service in the cloud that allows you to do your quality checks and keep shipping parts to your customer as you're expected to do, right? That you can do that temporarily while the IT team brings the normal quality system back online. Maybe you can process checks in a different way using an online service or that sort of thing. So think outside of the box and do that research for your business teams as you interact with them. So when they say, hey, we need to be able to do, print checks to at least our key vendors, then go out and do some researches on what you can do to make it so that they can print checks, rather than just say, well, here's a pen and a blank check, get to writing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. We want to make sure that, our payroll and accounts payable departments are definitely kept online and running. Okay, so this is actually leading into the next point that we had here, John, was the business continuity plans cloud edition. So our traditional BCP plans have included things like business resumption and business resumption centers. Well, it's kind of changed a little bit since COVID-19, seeing as pretty much every organization now has a work from home type solution or strategy in the event that you have to send people home. So we have really tested, in my opinion, John, business resumption plans to their maximum extent with COVID-19. Because what would happen prior to COVID-19 is we would actually have hot offices that were set up with phones and places for coming in and working. And since COVID-19, what we find is that everybody's now set up with their own home office. And so the ability to take and have a majority of our workforce actually in a business resumption type scenario, some type of remote connectivity via VPN, things like that, those are there. Those are available for us right now. And so when we look at moving this forward into 2022, we've seen the biggest test of business resumption ever in the history of business with COVID-19. And so now we know that it's possible. We don't even necessarily need these giant business resumption centers. We can take and we can just send people home and they can work from home or anywhere. Now, when we look at where the businesses have gone with COVID and over the last 2 to 3 years, the business continuity plans and kind of the cloud edition is what assets have we now moved up into the cloud and how do those now need to be included in our business continuity plan? And the other big piece is that we still need to remember that business continuity and DR plans are not driven by IT. They are assisted by IT. The requirements that are defined and how much pain the business can sustain is defined by the business. Business still drives all those requirements. So kind of what are your thoughts there, John?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks. And I kind of got ahead of myself and covered a lot of this in the last slide. But, where IT comes in and assists is when the business at a department or at a high level says, hey, this is what we need to be able to do to minimize the damage to our operations, minimize the expense both in the short term and the long term, because we get lost a lot in the short term expense. Oh, what's it going to cost for the cloud and being able to restore or spin up 1,000 VMs and that sort of thing. And that's important data, just like every tree in a forest is important. But, if we don't design in being able to accommodate things such as, hey, if we have a customer requirement to not shut down their production, but if we can't send them parts, their production shuts down within 8 hours, and we get back billed $100,000 an hour for shutting them down. And this is, a real scenario, Dave, that you and I have seen happen. That back billing from the customer is more expensive than it would have cost to spin the stuff up. And in addition, you've now damaged your relationship with that customer. They are going to have a real hard time as they look at you for possible new business or extension of contracts or whatever, because they wonder when's the next time you're going to shut them down, right? And your competitor who's trying to steal that business from you or take it away from you doesn't have that experience with the customer. So even though they are just as likely to have events as you are, the customer doesn't see that. So they come in and they say, well, yeah, we've got loads of extra protection. That would never happen when you have us do this. And so it's important that, IT is feeding those scenarios to the business, letting the business decide and feedback on, yeah, we have to prevent that by being able to do this or do that. And then we find solutions in the cloud. And like I said, if it's, getting a software as a service solution to provide a single need to the quality department or to the AP department or whatever, design that in, but then test it out also, because just like a DR plan, a business continuity plan needs to be tested. I can't tell you how many times I go in and the business continuity plan for payroll is, well, we're going to manually write the checks. And then you ask them, okay, you've got 1,000 people you have to write checks for. Let's test. And, handwriting checks for 1,000 people takes a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely, John. All right, so the next one here, Backup and Recovery, 2022 edition, Waste Not, Want Not. And I know that this one's kind of This one's interesting, John, because, we have servers that are cycled through. Let's say that we're running a 5-year life cycle, but maybe in production we're running a 36-month life cycle for server infrastructure. Are you finding a lot of organizations will rehab some of that because there's such a demand for backup targets, especially on-prem right now? Are you finding that they're rehabbing some of those old servers, maybe popping in some additional drives and turning them into backup targets, and maybe immutable backup targets for all intents and purposes? And if that's not available, we were talking about some of the supply chain constraints that are out there today, and maybe with scaling up to the cloud. Maybe we just use those and extend out. But do you see it as a good idea to reuse some of that existing hardware because of the fact that you might not be able to order in new? Maybe repurpose some of what we already have?
Oh, I love this, Dave. And you and I have used this solution a number of times in the past year, particularly with hyper-converged infrastructure, right? And you've been in that area and an expert in that area since its birth. And you know that now many organizations are coming through a refresh cycle with their HCI gear, which is well posed to be a backup target. We take that, we place it in another location or whatnot with good bandwidth, and then we make it a backup target, and then we configure our switches so that they simply enable the connection into it for just long enough to complete the backup and verification, and then shut down the port. So there is no actual network connectivity to that machine except for when the backup operation is running, right? And, sometimes we even put network connected power supplies and such so that we can get into the IPMI interface, right, Dave? And we script that so that the whole node or the whole cluster will shut off and only be running during that time. So it makes it into a sense like we were talking about in the last session, those offline disks, right? They're not even available to be touched by malware if it happens to permeate the network. And so using the old hardware to be able to do that speeds up the process because now you don't have to go ask the organization for money to invest in that stuff, even though it's important. You can use that. And that also gives you an opportunity to show how IT is doing their best to lower costs, not just in reduction of spend, but by maximizing the return on investment of every investment that's made. Because, the per year cost of a piece of hardware, if your refresh cycle is every 5 years, but then you redeploy it as a backup target for another 5 years, right? That per year cost is now 1/10 instead of 1/5. And that is important to the business. And most of us have to remember that our organizations don't exist because of IT. IT exists because of our organizations, right? So the more value that we show them that we provide, the more value and trust and confidence that they put into us.
Yeah, for sure. And just going back to that point of getting the most out of your hardware, I'm seeing a lot of organizations do that. They'll ride those backup targets until they utterly die. But there's a but to all of this, though, John, and that is when we look at the importance of a backup target, it's good that we can go and save money and we can do all of this, but now the event is here. We need to restore off of these backup targets. Just remember that your backup targets need the same care and feeding that you do as production workloads. Because remember, backups are just as much production as production, because in the event that you need to restore off of that backup target and it's having networking issues, it's having issues that are related to not having firmware updated or drivers updated, it's having issues related to dead drives, the list goes on and on. These are not just things that you put on the network and forget about. You need to be doing daily maintenance checks on your backup targets to make sure that they're not running out of space, to make sure that they're not throwing errors, and to make sure that they're healthy, okay? Don't just throw these out there and just pray that when, you need them 2-3 years down the road for some type of a critical restore operation, sets are just going to work. All of that needs to be tested and treat those as production.
And Dave, so this goes back to what we've said before many times, and others have said it. If you're not testing your backups, you don't have backups. Okay, you just need to assume that they're not going to work until you prove that they can. And this goes right to David's question or comment that he has posted in the chat, that can recycled hardware really handle the demand? We absolutely need to know that answer before we need it. So you put these pieces of gear back in as a backup target, and you back up to them, and then you live test them in, scenarios of what that would be in the real world if you had an event. And if they can't handle it, you either upgrade them so they can handle it, or you move on to another tactic. But they will be no good to you if you don't test them, as you said, and you don't care and feed them. And testing isn't a one-time event, right, Dave? It has to recur frequently. And in fact, many cyber insurance policies, they want you to test on a cadence of semi-annual or quarterly, right? And that can get a load. If you've got, hundreds of different application servers and different things, just testing your backups can be quite a load on IT, and it's why it gets forgotten. But then they go to do it, and like you said, there's a driver that doesn't seem to want to load or these kind of things, and now that recovery time objective is out of reach.
Yeah, for sure. And there's another really good one in here from David, and it's in regards to kind of that business continuity and this whole backup target discussion. Is the business will say, I want 100% uptime. IT says, okay. Then they say, are you really sure? Because 100% uptime is going to cost X amount of dollars. And so my solution that I always come back to the business is always going to say, there's never an option to patch the server during the day. There's never an option to do this. And you know what? That's a path that can be changed in working with the business, because you just need to explain that, listen, this is a critical update. Can we have from noon to 1 p.m., can we have that small outage window to patch this? And you go back to that business unit, and they'll come back and say, you know what? That's okay. We're all out to lunch. We're all going out for lunch anyways here. They're not out to lunch. They're going out for lunch. But to my point is that the business will be more accommodating. But yes, the reality is that 100% uptime is not realistic when the business sees the cost of what that's going to provide. So what I always give the business is three choices. I give them an A, which is like 100% uptime, and here's the cost. This is what it's going to look like. A B, something more realistic, something along the lines of what I'd like to put in, and a C, the kind of lower-end solution. I always find the business is coming in somewhere in between a happy medium of B and C. So,
and I will say, Dave, that the experience I have and the recommendation I always give to people is certainly executives. Executives want you to tell them the facts. They don't want you to tell them what you think they want to hear. But oftentimes, we're intimidated talking to the CEO or whatnot, and so, we're not as transparent as we need to be about the limitations. And the fact of the matter is we're the locksmith, we're the technician. We implement what they tell us they need implemented. So if they say they need 100% uptime, I don't argue with them that they need that or they don't need that. I simply come back to them with, this is the solution that provides 100% uptime and the level of redundancy, and here's the expense. And then, like you said, They make a choice that is like, hey, we can't afford to pay that because most organizations can't. And then you say, well, here's your B option, and here's what it costs, and here's what it gives up. You're not at 100% uptime. Now maybe you're at 90%, whatever. You're transparent about not only the costs, but what the give take is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've made the decision now, John. You're going to be storing all of your key backup data in the cloud. Let's say you really bid off on this, and you like what cloud backup options are getting you, and you've bidden off on this. What about protecting that from what I'll call, a drive-by reconnaissance from threat actors where, let's say, for argument's sake, they've gained access to your tenant now, John, and they're trying to do something with, or they've gotten some credentials for some type of a storage repository that's living up in the cloud. What are your thoughts on encrypting data at rest, both on-prem and in the cloud, to prevent a threat actor from just walking away with your disks? And from an on-prem scenario, very easy to visualize. If you had a USB drive that you were backing up to and you're using that as kind of your offline copy, in theory, someone could gain access to your infrastructure, grab that, put it in the pocket, and just walk out and go hack, crash, do whatever they want to do with that infrastructure, right? What are your thoughts on encrypting that data at rest? And, is that a good idea? Because in the cloud, it's kind of just a checkbox. It's a checkbox to encrypt your data at rest. And right now, I believe it's actually a default checkbox in there. It can still be toggled off. But is that a good idea for us to be looking at encrypting data at rest while sitting in the cloud?
Well, I can tell you that if you want your cyber insurance to pay off if you ever have to make a claim, it's a great idea, because every policy I've seen in the last 12 months, that's a requirement. And again, I spend a lot of time here, and I can tell you that the brokers and the underwriters are getting much stricter about verifying after the fact in the event of a claim, right? You wreck your car, an appraiser looks at it, they just don't take your word for the level of damage. And a similar way with cybersecurity events or cyber insurance events, they used to take your word when you made the attestation, when you made a claim, they never came on site. And Dave, you and I know that now, more often than not, they are sending specialists to look to guarantee that what you said was in place was in place. And if you say I had MFA for all accounts and they find that you had, I had this account that was configured for software that I didn't have MFA because we couldn't get the software to work. Okay, we understand. We're not going to pay the claim. And, I hate seeing IT in that position of explaining to the business that IT made a decision that cost the business its coverage. And it happens. And so there's no point in arguing whether it happens or not, or what you would do if it would happen, or whether your business would understand it if it happens or not. It's just acknowledging it would happen and deciding, do I want to prevent it happening, or do I want to roll the dice on what the outcome will be if it doesn't? And so the data at rest thing is one of those big ones. I don't know of a single policy where it's not written in the terms. So if you're not encrypting your data at rest, please make sure you check that against your policy, because I would hate for that to be the thing that causes you not to have a payout on a completely unrelated cyber insurance event.
Well, February of 2 years is the anniversary of the whole level ransomware attack that we saw a few years ago, John. And that was the one where the threat actors actually hacked their way into the infrastructure. It wasn't a payload delivery. They hacked their way in and delivered a systematic attack on all of our on-prem infrastructure. And they were able to get in and wipe out all of the backup targets. They reset all of the NAS devices that we had to factory. They wiped out all of our HCI infrastructure. Everything was ground down. Everything was encrypted. They 100% had us. And so the only way to recover from that was we had a encrypted copy of backup data that was up in the cloud that was synchronizing up there. It had a separate set of encryption keys to access it, not just the credentials, and we were able to recover off that. Now, I'm not going to say the recovery was really pretty. Were we able to recover off it? Yes, absolutely we were. But that's kind of what you have to think about when you have this encryption. You need to make sure that, those credentials are like the holy grail for you. You need to make sure that, the same concept as an offline root CA where, if the top level of the certificate authority gets compromised, everything underneath is gone. Same types of concepts when we're protecting those encryption keys. All right.
And Dave, I wanted to throw in there. So David says that, yes, but there's a lot of wasted time building a faux plan that the business can't afford. And you keep talking about providing value to the business. Hard to see that as a value. And that's a great point. if your business or your organization doesn't see value in what you're doing, then you shouldn't be doing it, right? We align the solutions and the things we design and present them to the business, and if they don't see the value in them, once we're transparent, then we move on to another alternative. That's our role, is to find a solution that the business finds value in and agrees with the value. Because at the end of the day, the business has options, and they have to make a choice of what's right for them. No business is the same as any other. So yeah, absolutely. Don't take anything as being, hey, what we say is right for the small mom and pop shop and right for the, $1 trillion a year company. It isn't. You have to take the idea, see if it fits, and see if it matches in. But the one thing that we do know universally is that when events happen and you need that enterprise backup and recovery, and it's a cybersecurity event or whatever, that the fallout is real, and our job in IT is to minimize that fallout.
Well, and when we look at Backup and Recovery 2022 edition, John, I compare a lot of organizations running their infrastructure in the cloud versus running their infrastructure on-prem. One of the big differences in running that infrastructure on-prem versus in the cloud is most organizations fell into the guidance that we gave them, which was, I need you to consolidate down to a single Active Directory forest and a single Active Directory domain. That was the utopia, because the administrative boundaries inside of there were so much easier having a single forest and a single domain to manage everything. And so a lot of organizations worked over, the course of the past 20 years to consolidate and wrap all of those projects up, and they did a darn good job at it. But one of the problem is that from a security boundary perspective, we created a flat security boundary that if that environment was compromised, you were not only gaining access to desktops, you're getting access to servers, you're gaining access to a lot of that key infrastructure. So, we implemented solutions out there like Zero Trust and ways to take and defend and guard those single domains. But then came the concept of, we want to take and we really want to protect this by putting in a fabric. And so I still have a challenge having individuals in IT understanding the principle and why a fabric is important, John. And the easiest way now that I've found to explain this is this. I ask a very simple question. I say, all right, do you run things in the cloud, in your favorite cloud provider of your choice? Well, yeah, of course we do. We're modern. We want to run hybrid infrastructure. We want to run between on-prem and the cloud, and we've got networks connected. We've got everything set up. Okay. So that environment that's running inside of the cloud, do you have any access to the host hypervisors in that environment? Well, not directly to the hypervisor. That's the cloud provider that manages that. Well, what that cloud provider is providing you as a tenant, as a subscriber, is a fabric. Somebody else is managing the fabric, and you're riding all of your workloads and all of your resources on top of it. So one of the things that we recommend, John and I wholeheartedly recommend to protect your infrastructure in 2022, is you should implement a similar design on-prem. You should take and you should build a separate Active Directory forest and a separate Active Directory domain that houses key artifacts inside of your infrastructure. Those key artifacts being your hypervisors should live there. Your management servers that drive that environment should live there. Your backup targets should live there. Because then, in the event that you have a security breach inside of your primary Active Directory forest and Active Directory domain, you are protected because that's a separate set of credentials. We have a limited subset of highly secured credentials to gain access into the fabric to do fabric maintenance and management. And not everybody needs access into the fabric. You need access into your workloads. And so in the similar sense of how a cloud runs, we want to almost run on-prem in a very similar way to the way that the cloud runs. What this does is this allows you to have the ability to recover when the ransomware event hits, because it is going to impact your primary Active Directory domain and your primary Active Directory forest, okay? So setting up that secure guarded fabric is incredibly important. It's actually not that hard to build out. The next thing is making sure that you have an additional layer of security and protection with multi-factor authentication on everything. In fact, that's a new cyber insurance requirement for every single policy that John and I have seen in 2022 so far. So, John, what are your thoughts on securing the fabric? And do you think that that's a good analogy to think of when we think of fabric, where it's almost like your cloud provider, what they give you is we want to just do on-prem?
Absolutely, and really, I want to, because you covered it so well, Dave. The only thing I want to kind of delve in a little deeper is the concept that it's a separate identity management domain. I'll get into that in a second, because I want to go with your analogy, because it's the perfect analogy with the cloud provider. And I also want to tell people or have them think about this. When you call in for support on your cloud solution, right, and you get to level 1 support, and they escalate to level 2, and they may escalate to level 3, even that level 3 escalation person doesn't have access to that underlying hypervisor architecture, right? They don't have an account in it. They can't do anything in it. They have to get a hold of a different team who handles that. So it's right with what you said. And that separate identity management domain, like you said, the separate AD, forest, and domain is completely different. It's not an account that's in your tenant or in my tenant. It's a completely separate thing, and it's very limited. And I like to think of that like a safe. Your production domain forest is a building or a house. It has loads of doors and windows and all sorts of things because it needs to. It has dozens or hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of accounts in it. And each one of them is a potential vector for a threat. The fabric becomes like a safe. A safe typically has one door, one point of entry, one vector of attack. Now, our fabric will have more than that because there will tend to be more than one account, but it will certainly be, as you said, Dave, right, a very small number. And it's a separate identity domain. So the person that has the key to the front door on my production domain, my house, doesn't have the key to the safe necessarily. So it's not every IT person on the team has an account to the fabric. It needs to be very limited. The less limited you make it, the less effective it becomes.
All right, so we had a couple questions coming through just in regards to the cooperation of IT and the business, and how it has to be a realistic combination of the two between IT and the business. Like, we need to make sure that we're working in a partnership and not really as opposing forces inside of the organization. So John and I like to say that DR and backup and recovery really take a village in order to take and to get this done, because everything that is designed from an IT and a technical perspective needs to make sure that it's lining up with the stakeholders. And this plays true for any of your cloud and recovery solutions that are out there as well, because just like your on-prem infrastructure, anything that you're going to run in the cloud, be it a Kubernetes instance for some web application, be it a managed SQL instance, be it workloads, IaaS workloads that you're going to be running up there, they all need to be backed up, they all need to be protected, and they all need to be recoverable. And if you are going to be running in a hybrid configuration, you need to be making sure that you're protecting that as well. And so when it comes time to go through a DR exercise, like John said, you're going to take and you're going to have to practice this, right? Your training exercises are huge. You need to make sure you go through simulations. You need to make sure you not only simulate going there, you simulate coming back. And nothing is more true, and actually, it actually complicates things with having a hybrid infrastructure, because now your DR playbook has to have a few hooks in different directions. But what are your thoughts on integrating the business into your DR plans and really communicating with those stakeholders, John?
It's huge, Dave. It really it has to be a partnership, and it has to be successful. And we in IT have to really remember that it's not to become defensive, not to become more interested in our solution because it's our solution that aligns with the business. 20 years or so ago, I had one of my mentors talk to me when I was arguing something that the organization really didn't want to go with, and I couldn't get off of it. I was younger. He looked at me and he said, "I want you to remember this. The business can outsource IT. IT can't outsource the business." And that stuck with me. And I guess maybe one of the reasons it stuck with me is because that organization did end up outsourcing IT. So it kind of made it really stick. But what I took from that is that it's more important to the business that I hear what they're saying and that I incorporate that into the solutions I provide. And if what I provide doesn't work for them, I just keep going back to the drawing board and trying to provide something else that is good for the business that they can sign off on. Because when we all sign off and we all align and we take the personality out of it, the business in a lot safer place, right? And unfortunately or fortunately, Dave, you and I, our perspective, we are often called in to many different organizations when it's an after event situation. So we get that skill based from the experience of looking at what cleanups look like. So we're crime scene investigators, I guess you could say at that point. We're always looking at car wrecks. And when you look at wreck after wreck after wreck, you see some of the commonalities that happen in them, and you come up with ideas to prevent some of that damage. And that's really kind of what we want to bring back and share with the business so that we can prevent that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, moving into, a hybrid discussion here, John, the leveraging of cloud for the concept of a hot site, because like you mentioned, it's not easy for every organization to just spin up DR in a secondary facility, networking, complications, skill sets. So many things come into play here. And I find the ability to take and spin up hot sites in the cloud to be very, very viable for a lot of organizations, because you're only going to be paying for those CPU compute cycles when your VMs are actually running in the cloud. So if you have, like, say, a domain controller running in the cloud, well, you don't want to really turn that one off. But some of the other workloads that you're just replicating up there, you're just paying for dormant storage. So you're paying for standby costs before it actually gets turned on. So that becomes very advantageous. One of the things, though, in this is that not all workloads belong in the cloud. And so some of these belong and are going to need to stay on-prem. And some of these workloads that need to remain on-prem, for example, I know, John, you and I do a lot of work in the manufacturing sector, are things that would, for example, drive a plant. Well, I need to be able to sustain an internet outage. Well, we talked earlier in the sessions about, cloud not being 100%. It's not available 100%. Cloud doesn't work that way. There are outages that will occur in the cloud. Well, are you okay with, your plant being shut down or not being able to process, parts or shipments and stuff like that? Probably not. So you're going to want to have some type of a hybrid approach here. And so this is where I look at that, hybrid is probably going to remain there in some shape for a lot of organizations. Many can probably completely migrate to the cloud. And with that being said, if we are going to run those workloads up in the cloud, we need to protect them in a similar way. And so it's not something that we're just going to take and, just shift that stuff directly up there. So this next one here is actually a good one here, because I know that you're a very detail-oriented person, John. And so when we look at building any solution, cloud, on-prem, from a backup and recovery perspective, you mentioned it earlier. A backup's not a backup unless you test the backup, right? And in testing a backup, we've been caught in scenarios before where organizations think that it's a great idea to go get the cheapest piece of NAS-based storage that they can possibly find, dump some, the most cost-effective spinning disks that they can have in there, and the backups will run to it, John. They will go to that device. But the real question is, for example, that NAS appliance you have has a single 1 gig Ethernet connection plugging into it. Well, the reality is it doesn't matter how fast your drives are running in behind there. You can only pull data off of that thing at a maximum sustained TCP throughput of 90 to 100 megabytes a second. It's the reality. So now what I do is I actually do a stopwatch calculation, a calculator calculation with everyone. I say, okay, so you want to know how fast your data will come off there? I can tell you without even looking at the device, because I know how to calculate this. I've done this a lot. If your device can give me an outbound transfer rate of 100 megabytes a second, just hypothetically, and I've got 60 seconds in every minute, so I go 100 times by 60, and I've got 60 minutes in an hour. That's your calculation for per hour. You take megabytes per second times by 60 seconds times by 60 minutes is going to give you your calculation over the hour. And so all of a sudden I can get like a little over 300 and some gigs and change an hour off of that device. Fantastic, John. 300 gigs. Oh, but I have 40 terabytes stored on there. Oh, so you mean to tell me that's going to take like 5 days to get my data off there if nothing hiccups? Yep, pretty much. And so the recovery time matters, okay? And this is why you need to treat backups just as much as production. And, John, you and I also like to say that, don't be a data hoarder here as well. And you need to be able to press the delete button. So what are your thoughts on recovery time objectives and making sure that those are met, both cloud and on-prem?
Well, you've absolutely covered it really well. So I kind of want to look at a couple other things you say and just kind of add to them that, preparing for a cloud outage. Remember, a cloud outage is an inability to get to your resources in the cloud. It doesn't matter whether it's the provider that's down or it's your internet connection that's down. You can't get to the resource. That's an outage. So if you have some piece of machinery that's, looking up a program code and then passing it to a device to do some operation, and it can't do it if it doesn't do that, and you have somebody hit a telephone pole that takes out the fiber that brings in your internet connection, and you put that up in the cloud, guess what? Production's down. So that's, I think, exactly kind of what you were talking about, Dave, where you're like, we need to look at things like that with the business and say these have to be on-prem, right? Because we can't take an inability to get to the resource for any reason, whether it be that, Microsoft rolls a bad patch in Azure and it's down, or whether the beer truck hit the pole outside the plant and knocked out the fiber. Whatever the reason is, we can't tolerate it, so we keep that on-prem. And then, as far as the recovery time objective, that's where that, a key part of that testing, that validation comes in, because you're absolutely right, Dave. If we can't make the RTO, then the backup isn't a backup because we can't recover from it. And if we can't recover from it, what's the point for its existence other than to, do a bunch of work? So being able to test and validate that we can recover within the time frame defined by our RTO, defined by our organization, is critical to the success of our plan.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And so we're gonna finish up with one more here, and then we've got actually quite a few questions that are sitting in from the audience here, John. And so this one here is, our best friends forever slide. And so, when we look at disaster recovery and cybersecurity, what type of a key role does cybersecurity operations play in the event of recovery? What are some of the things that you can think of top of mind?
Well, we've talked a lot about them, Dave, right? Where we need to make sure that our data is encrypted at rest. That includes our backups. We need to make sure those backups are immutable. Who are experts in doing that other beyond the cybersecurity team, right? There may be other experts, but the cybersecurity team is certainly one of them that's key. And then, look at other things related to cybersecurity, such as things like, making sure that we have proper APT protection and things like that, particularly not just in our production areas, but in our backup targets and that sort of thing. So, you really can't have a strategic enterprise backup and recovery plan anymore, in my mind, without engaging cybersecurity.
No, absolutely, John, for sure. All right, well, we've got a few minutes here, John. Let's take some live Q&A from the audience here. And so let's see what we have inside. All right, there's a good one here from Daniel. Daniel, thank you so much for the question. And so this is kind of a bit of a point and the question. It says, our organization has backups going back about 10 to 15 years. If that NAS has to be recovered, what can you do about the bottleneck for the network adapter? So it depends on the model of the device that you're using. One of the things that you can look at doing is seeing if you can add an additional, for example, 10 gig adapter into that device. The other things that you could take a look at doing is if there are multiple gig links inside of there, you could look at teaming those adapters. So you could use link aggregation or just, generic teaming inside of there to try to bond those connections together to see what you can do to speed that up. And the other option is, if it is going on that old, what you may want to look at doing is finding some new hardware, newer modern NAS. And, if you're sticking with the same vendor, in a lot of cases, you can use mirroring technologies to mirror those SANs so that you can get the same data over there. So that's probably what I would do in that case.
Dave, I'd like to add in on that one that this is a perfect scenario where if you're doing tiering, like we talked about earlier, and you're tiering your data and you're tiering your backups, you can also tier your recoveries. If it's a 10-year-old piece of data, odds are it's not as critical to the immediate operations as the data from yesterday or the data from this morning. So you can tier your backups to focus on the recovery of that immediately needed information and then just kind of work your way backwards. And when you do that, you can also then, since it's tiered and separated, maybe look at putting some of that really old data up into cheap cloud storage, like blob storage, that sort of thing. And then you recover from there. And that offloads some of the quantity that you have to restore from that NAS device because now you've separated it essentially across two devices. So those are just a couple thoughts I had on that.
Absolutely. And the next one here is just more of a point, and Thomas just makes a really good point here. He says, make sure that your keys are not with your data. Yes, please don't put a text file in with your data, with your keys right there. Make sure that that's in a different location. I know that Microsoft has solutions for storing stuff like that. They've got Azure Key Vault and things like that. So just make sure that you're not just putting that right with your data. It kind of totally defeats the purpose. All right, next one here.
On those, Dave, as you get to the next one, another thing is if you use password vaults, so you use, LastPass or something like that, those are also good places because they're not typically on the same cloud provider where maybe your encrypted backup vault is or that kind of thing. Keep your keys in there.
Oh, here's such a good one. And this actually leads into, there's two questions along exactly the same lines here, John, and this is from Thomas and Rich, okay? So Thomas states here, data classification and prioritization. Oh my goodness, this is so important. And this leads into a question that Rich had with, are there any tools or suggestions that you have to classify your data? Because how are you going to create the tiers of data, and how are you going to know what can be archived out? And so that's such a difficult one, Thomas and Rich. But one of the suggestions that I have for you is that you look at something like Azure Files. And with Azure Files, you can create policies that will help you define this without you having to go into the actual data itself. And I look at something like engineering data, John, for example, with this, where we have many different projects, many different files. I still need to be able to access the projects that I had from 10, 15, 20 years ago, but it might only be every now and again. So with the policies that you create, I can say, okay, I only want to keep 6 months of the data on-prem that's frequently accessed. If it hasn't been accessed in 6 months, I want to push it off to the cool tier. The cool tier will be off into the cloud. How it looks to the users is it looks like the file structure is all there. It just takes a moment longer to retrieve that document from the cool storage because it has to reactivate it. Think in exactly the same way that we would use OneDrive for Business. In OneDrive for Business, there's an option to right-click on a file and say free up space. It pushes it back to the cloud. This works exactly the same way. So with that, I think what we're going to do is we're going to hand it back over to our esteemed colleagues, John K. Waters here. And thank you guys so much for having John and myself. It's our pleasure to do these as always. And John, back over to you.
Thank you, Dave. Wow, what an absolutely awesome session. That's all the questions we have time for this session. Thanks, many thanks to Dave Kula and John O'Neill Sr. for another great session. And thanks to our sponsors, Metallic, Chaosoft, and Acronis for making it possible. We're going to take a short break now, but we'll be right back with our third session, Hottest Third-Party Products, moderated by Becky Nagel, Vice President of Digital Strategy and Web for the Converge 360 group of 1105 Media. And remember, at the end of that session, this upcoming session, one lucky attendee will be receiving an iPad Pro with the M1 chip. But you've got to be here to get it, so stick with us. Back in a few.
Welcome back to our third session. Becky, please take it away.
Hi, guys. Happy Wednesday. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is Becky, and I'm your moderator for the third and final session of the day, Cloud Third-Party Solutions. Some quick notes before we start. One thing is you are going to get a replay of this presentation, so be sure to keep an eye out for your email. You're going to get the entire thing sent to you so you can watch it. You'll be able to rewatch any sessions, anything you missed. 2, be sure to stay on to the end, not only because you need to be on at the end in order to be entered into the drawing for the iPad Pro with the M1 chip. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be on because we use a random number generator, and that's where we pick the winner. But also because at the very end, you're also going to get a survey. We want to know what you like. We want to know what you don't. We want to know what you want to see in the future. Everything like that. We really, really want to get your feedback so that we can put on more of these events and give you more of what you want. So the editors read every single comment that you put in these surveys, so please share your opinion. Finally, speaking of future events, we want to just sincerely thank our sponsors, Metallic, Chaosoft, and Acronis. They're underwriting this content. By them doing that, it allows us to bring you these events and do it for free. So, and they're supporting the community and, it's sharing some great information, but just also allowing us to do this and do more of these events. So we're really, really grateful that they've partnered with us. So Metallic, Chaosoft, Acronis, thank you so much. We really do appreciate you. We appreciate all of you guys being with us today on Wednesday. And we're ready to get started with this third session. So with that, I'm thrilled to announce our first speaker, Ray Stamps. He's Principal Solutions Architect at Metallic. Ray, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Becky. It's a pleasure to be here and present to the members who've attended. So my name is Ray Stamps, as Becky indicated. I'm one of the principal solution architects here focused on our Metallic offering. Metallic is our backup as a service solution that offers all the core technology of Commvault that has been developed over the last 25 years in a backup as a service model. At a very high level, Metallic came into being based on customer guidance. Commvault, being in the market for over 25 years, has developed some of the richest application integration around enterprise-level data protection and management. With Metallic, we've taken that core technology, that core code base, and packaged it for our customers to deliver a simplified, easy to administrate, fully managed backup as a service offering. Now, as part of that, we've taken all of the best practices that we've identified, developed, and recommended for our customers and enabled those by default. Technologies such as encryption of data in flight and data at rest, deduplication of content, and that's at a variable block level, so it's very efficient. Compression of that content so that we can be very efficient with the transfer of that information over internet connections. And then advanced features like ransomware protection, as well as identifying anomalies in the environment and providing actionable notifications. We're able to deliver all of this while adhering to a broad variety of data compliance and regulatory considerations, such as HIPAA, GDPR, and then even as an internal processes standpoint, we're SOC compliant and ISO compliant. And so as we think about Metallic, it's really taking all of the enterprise class functionality around data protection and data management, delivering it in an easy to use, easy to deploy, easy to administrate, easy to manage model that requires no cloud expertise and is able to be consumable as a subscription service to protect the vast majority of your enterprise class data. Now, as we think about delivering that service, we looked at a lot of different methodologies to do this. And because of our relationship with Microsoft for over the last 20 years, we approached them to identify if their Microsoft Azure platform could deliver the very stringent security requirements necessary to deliver this service while adhering to very aggressive and very specific security requirements. And they were very able to effectively support those. Those being isolation of our customer tenants, highly secured environments to ensure that the data was protected in an air-gapped methodology. And then also dedicated infrastructure that was not shared with other Azure tenants. Microsoft was able to deliver all of this while enabling Metallic to be delivered globally. Today we support 23 different countries, and we support multiple regions across those countries, allowing our customers to protect their content and deliver geo-resiliency with replication of content across multiple regions. Let's take a look at the workloads that Metallic protects. So as we think about Metallic and the technologies that have been developed by Commvault that are the underpinnings of our ability to deliver this backup as a service SaaS offering, the first that comes to mind is our hybrid workloads. And these would include virtualization workloads that are on-prem as well as out in the cloud. For on-prem workloads, we protect VMware, Hyper-V, and then in the cloud, we protect Azure VMs as well as AWS EC2 instances. Along with both those cloud and on-prem virtualization workloads, we also protect containerized workloads. Considerations would include Kubernetes, OpenShift, and the vast majority of containerized orchestration platforms. And again, these workloads are protected in the data center, running on virtual infrastructure, as well as on physical infrastructure. When we think about application-aware workloads, these may be physical, they may be virtual. On-prem, being able to provide database-aware backups for SQL, SAP HANA, and Oracle, both on virtualized and physical hardware platforms. Those are integrated and supported. The same is true for file and object workloads across Windows servers, Linux, and Unix servers. We also provide protection for blob and file-based workloads. And again, this is on-prem and in the cloud. So workloads like NAS, on-prem, we can protect that. Azure file systems, in the cloud, we can protect that. NetApp file systems in the cloud, we can protect that. And all of this with the flexibility of allowing our customers, depending upon where their workloads reside, to use their own storage if they choose to. That means that on-prem workloads with hypervisors or physical servers, we support the ability for our customers to use their own local storage for those nearline backups. And these are typically used for workloads with that are critical, and we want to back up and recover very, very quickly. Typically, that's for a short duration, maybe 2 weeks to 30 days. And then we also support the ability for our customers to use their own cloud storage. And that cloud storage may reside in Azure as Azure Blob or AWS as AWS S3. In addition to that, we support a third option, which is referred to as Metallic Cloud Storage Service. That you'll see in the upper right section. And what this is with customers that want an all-inclusive solution, where they want the backup technology that's integrated into their workloads, as well as the underlying infrastructure, specifically the storage, we provide a hot tier as well as a cool tier of this MCSS service. Hot tier is used for direct backups. Cool tier is used for secondary copies for longer-term retention. And that's acquired at a per terabyte level. Now, as we think about SaaS workloads such as O365 or Dynamics 365 or Salesforce, we protect those workloads as well with a very, very simple model. The licensing is based on a per-user basis. And with that, we include unlimited storage and up to unlimited retention. Now, that when I say unlimited retention, some companies don't want to retain everything forever. So we do provide flexibility in defining your retention plan and customizing that retention plan for each one of the workloads. Now, with consideration that we are using the most advanced APIs for each one of these SaaS options, we do provide very granular recoverability across each one of those components. So down to the mail level, down to the unique file level for Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, without having to restore the full object before restoring the content. We support our customers being able to drill down into the backup and recover unique digital assets down to the version level. So you could recover a specific version of a specific file from any one of those productivity components. In addition, we also do protect endpoint devices. This has become very important for a lot of the businesses affected by the pandemic with distributed workforce. Some businesses have decided to shift and pivot to a distributed workforce model. And this extends many of the business-critical digital assets out to those endpoints. So protection of those resources becomes more and more important. And we provide enterprise-class endpoint protection for laptops and desktops, and also including unlimited storage resources with retention up to 1 year. We do have the ability to extend that retention, but we found around best practices that 1 year tends to be the right time frame for the vast majority of our customers. Finally, as a value add to our customers, we support protection of Active Directory, and that could be Microsoft AD or Azure AD, and that's included as part of the service. And then the final component is we do support eDiscovery for the Exchange resources as well as endpoint resources for those eDiscovery/compliance search requirements. So as you can see, Metallic not only provides protection for the hybrid workloads, but also SaaS workloads, endpoint, and delivers storage services to go along with that. Finally, as we look at the security considerations, something that we're very proud of, a few months back we completed all 421 security controls to achieve FedRAMP High Ready status. And that's something that speaks volumes to the level of security and mechanisms that we put in place that do align all the ways up to the federal government requirements. Entities like the DoD or the three-letter acronym agencies for the government can leverage Metallic to protect their workloads in GCCI. Now, as we think about security and we're moving data from your production environments, be that physical, cloud, or endpoint, or SaaS, all content is encrypted in flight, and that's using AES 256-bit. When written, it's deduped, compressed, and encrypted, and stored in zero trust access controlled storage. What that means is not only are our backups immutable, but the underlying storage is not directly administratable. What that in turn provides is the ability to have immutable storage that cannot be administrated or affected. It's a resource that you back up to and recover from. All of this is secured with multi-factor authentication, with intelligent ransomware and anomaly detection, where we're running analytics across your content and looking for strange behavior, unique things that are outside of what is traditionally expected behavior in change rates, content being deleted, and so forth. We also have the ability to insert honeypot files, which are not associated with the underlying protected content, but are triggers to identify any time the malicious activity is occurring in the file structure. Bear with me one sec. The final section is really just how it's connected. As we think about the data flow, when we think about the left side being a physical data center or the right side being cloud infrastructure, the left side is really where your workloads reside. We insert what's referred to as a gateway for those workloads where you want to manage virtual infrastructure for intelligent management of that, which eliminates the requirement to have agents for each one of those VMs. So we directly integrate and communicate with the hypervisor layer and can back that up to your local storage resources or directly to your cloud resources, or as that third option that I described, directly to Metallic Cloud Storage Services. The same model holds true with cloud workloads, where for Azure virtual machines, we actually deploy and integrate through registered applications. The same holds true with AWS EC2 instances, where we would deploy a gateway in that environment and have intelligent direct communication with the virtualization management structure to provide snapshot-based backups. All of this is supported in addition with agent-based intelligent integration with SQL, Oracle, SAP HANA, as well as agent-based file management, so protection of NAS-based workloads or application servers. So it provides a very high level of flexibility to back up to your storage on-prem, your cloud storage, or storage managed by the Metallic service. So with that, I'll take a pause and let's take a look and see if there are any questions that we can address.
Hey, Ray, great presentation. Yes, we do have questions for you. So, and just a reminder to the audience, go ahead and put your questions in. We do have time to take some questions, and those we don't, we'll make sure to get over to Ray, and he can answer them after the presentation. So either way, your questions will get answered. Go ahead and put them in. Let's start with this one. It's a real good one. A lot of our readers are moving to a zero trust model. The question is, you said Metallic is built around zero trust methodologies. What practices or features are in place?
Great question. So when we think about zero trust access control, what that does is it eliminates the requirement for administration of the storage layer. It's managed as a service, as a resource. And the way that we manage it on the back end is through API integration with the storage. So all of the calls, all the writes, the gets, the puts are managed through APIs. What that means is that as with elevator permissions, as you log into your own dedicated Metallic tenant, there's no direct administration available to that storage resource. It grows automatically as your storage requirements grow. And it's a resource, again, as I mentioned earlier, that you can write to and read from, but can't directly administrate. This is important because in most cloud environments or even physical environments, anytime that you've got direct access with elevated permissions to storage, you can provision storage, but accidentally or maliciously, that storage can also be formatted or deleted. Really doesn't matter how securely you write the content to. By eliminating that security gap, we provide an extremely highly secured resource. One thing that I didn't mention with MCSS is that as part of that service, we actually incur egress fees. One of the drawbacks to a lot of implementation of cloud infrastructure are those hidden costs, things like egress of moving data out of the cloud for recovery operations or transaction fees. With our MCSS storage, that's all built in as part of the per terabyte cost. So very predictive price models are included with MCSS.
You might have just answered this question. This question just came in. Sorry, something got rearranged here. So let's go to this question. You mentioned air-gapped backups. What does that mean?
Great question. So traditionally, air-gapped was the idea that there could be error between the production environment and the backup. Very similar to tape media, where you could actually eject it from the tape drive, and that would isolate it and protect it from any sort of malicious activity affecting your backups. With more modernized architectures where cloud comes into play, it's kind of like there's no real beginning or end to the internet, right? Everything's connected, and yet the way that we do air gapping in these modernized architectures is to completely segment the control plane, so that the management of your production environment does not grant you access directly into the management of your backup environment. So through complete segmentation of the control planes, we're able to deliver virtual air gapping. That's complemented by two tiers of immutable writing. One is all of our backups are written immutably, but in addition to that, the underlying storage is immutable in the sense that once it's written, it can't be changed, it can't be edited. And this protects against malicious software attacks.
Okay, another question that has come in. Metallic has their own storage, or would we need to buy our own storage?
That's an excellent question. So we provide the flexibility for you to bring your own storage. For the hybrid workloads, we also offer a storage service that can be acquired on a per terabyte level for those hybrid workloads of a hot tier and a cool tier. Hot tier, because we're aligned with Microsoft, hot tier is actually GRS storage, GRS hot. GRS stands for Geo-Resilient or Redundant Storage, where we use paired data centers. There's 3 copies of the content written across 3 availability zones in the primary region. That's then replicated to a paired region that's geographically segmented, typically hundreds to thousands of miles apart. And that same data is replicated 3 times across 3 additional availability zones. The cool tier for longer-term retention is LRS storage, or locally resilient storage. And that is 3 copies across 3 availability zones in a single region. And that's referred to as LRS cool. So those are the storage tiers that we offer, and those are required per terabyte. Now, for SaaS offerings and endpoint, we include the storage. But for hybrid, we provide that flexibility of bring your own or acquire cloud storage resources that are directly integrated into the Metallic service.
Great. Well, we're out of time, but we do have more questions. And guys, if you have more questions for Ray, just put them in the system right now. Again, we'll get them over to him. But we always leave with this, and I know it's up on the screen right now, but I know people can go to metallic.io/trial, and that's where they go to sign up for that trial, correct?
Perfect. Yes. So we do support 30-day trials. If you would like to do it yourself, you're welcome to sign up and run through that yourself. If you'd like a guided trial, which we do on a very regular basis, please reach out to your local Commvault and or Metallic sales specialist, and we can coordinate and work with you on that.
Ray, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And now I'm so thrilled to welcome back to us for our next speaker. It's Bob Bobel. He is Chaosoft founder. Bob, please take it away.
Hey, how are you? Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. I'm going to take us down a little bit of a different track today to point out something that a lot of people sort of tend to ignore until it's too late. And that is, in today's hybrid world, Microsoft in particular, their directories are dependent upon one another. Your on-premise directory and your cloud-based Azure Active Directory in hybrid mode are synchronizing changes between the two, and if your on-premise directory goes out, you're going to find very quickly that is one of the weakest links in this process. It was never designed really to be a cloud-based directory. And so that's what our company, one of the 3 major focuses of our company is to help you protect those Microsoft resources. So I'm going to talk specifically about the recovery of Active Directory, not just at the object level, not using bare metal backup of servers, but also at a full forest recovery level. And we call it immediate full forest recovery because it literally is. And we'll show you how that works. So a couple of proof slides here. And thanks for whoever moved that. That was great. I can move the slides myself. I know how to do it. I just hadn't gotten to it yet. This is sort of just over the past 12 months or so, some of the Active Directory attacks that have literally taken out entire organizations, and they take time to recover because the traditional method that Microsoft provides is simply a list of things that you have to do and suggested scripts. They don't have any kind of products to do this or any kind of things to make this more efficient. So there are several other companies out there that do it. I think we are the third. All of us here at Chaosoft come from another vendor called Quest Software. They're one of the leaders in Microsoft on-premise management of solutions. And we pretty much have the solutions that they provide as well. But we founded this company to go after hybrid and cloud management, monitoring, and recovery solutions. You might notice Colonial Pipeline, and every day you're reading something else where Active Directory, legacy Active Directory has been taken out, which in turn then prevents all your users from logging in. It basically shuts your business down. So when we look at this as not just a Azure problem or a legacy Active Directory problem. It's truly a hybrid problem. And so we commissioned a study from Pulse Research to look at, interviewing people and finding out exactly where they were. And this was one of the most startling statistics that they came back with. And I'm just going to draw your attention to the center of the circle. 79% of the organizations that are enterprises running Microsoft solutions still have Active Directory on-premise as their primary authoritative directory. So that's the first thing I would point out. And the second thing I would point out is the third bullet on the right, which is in hybrid mode, those two are joined at the hip, which means anything that impacts the on-premise directory, again, that's the weak link here, is also going to affect your Azure Active Directory. So many people, what they'll do is they'll simply say, okay, if we get hit with a cyber attack and it takes out the on-premise directory, which is the more porous and less securable of the two, we'll just start using the Azure side. Well, there's a reason enterprises remain in hybrid. They have applications and data that require authentication of the local directory. And so it usually takes a couple of days, 3, 4, 5 days. In one case, we're going to see here in a moment, it was 9 days to recover it. So when we look at this, we look at it from a hybrid perspective. Here is a worst-case scenario. Actually, there have been worse incidents where other organizations have taken longer, but this is a pretty well-studied one. This happened several years ago. Maersk, which is the largest shipping company in the world, within 7 minutes, they had 55,000 devices encrypted. One domain controller, which is the Active Directory server, remained, and it took 1,200 applications that they were using that were attached to Active Directory out. And the interesting thing that I thought was sort of a side note was that the CIO came back into the office and for the next 70 days slept in the office as they tried to get everything back online. The initial response was to recover Active Directory so that users could log in. Second to that was getting all the applications and data back. It took them 9 days following Microsoft's best practices to get Active Directory, get their forest back online so people could just simply log in. They took a write-down of $350 million in losses from that because of that time they were offline. So when you have these problems, and I spoke with IT management of one of the top 5 banks recently, and his comment was, yeah, we think of this as when we get hit, not if we get hit. And so they're pre-planning to shorten that recovery time as much as possible. You never know when these things are going to hit. It depends on when it's your turn, really. So they started looking at what it took to do an Active Directory forest, on-premise forest recovery, and then add to that the recovery of anything that might have been corrupted or changed in Azure Active Directory as a result. Things that might have been changed inappropriately, synchronized up, and then the synchronization gets cut off because the servers are no longer available. They've been encrypted or they've been wiped out. This is just the on-premise side. So we've listed at top-level steps, 22 steps that you have to perform on every domain controller that you have in your environment, or at least one in every forest domain you have. And then obviously if you have multiple forests, it just gets worse from there. But to do this, again, there aren't any tools that Microsoft provides, and there's so many steps to this. People will look at that, they get the document out, they write a couple scripts, they never test it. So we found that 30% of people who were in this hybrid mode, 30% of organizations that we surveyed, same Pulse survey, didn't actually have any backup strategy. And then another 30%, almost a third, had a great backup strategy they tested maybe once a year. So why does that become so tough? And it goes back to there is no native support for recovering that on-premise. So if you're a retailer or a manufacturing company, and imagine all of your equipment is tied into Active Directory, and somebody encrypts or wipes out all your domain controllers, every second you're down is money flying out the door that you won't recoup. Can't take orders, can't produce materials, can't produce product. People can't log in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is a recovery guide, so if you don't believe me, you can go straight to Microsoft's recovery guide. It's on their search or on their knowledge base. and it'll walk you through all the steps. It'll tell you exactly what has to happen. Now, of course, we've automated that process, but I want to go into a little more detail here. And we do it almost instantly. I can't claim instant because it does take a couple minutes for us to recreate the environment, but it's almost instant. We're talking about forest outages first and foremost. Those are the ones that take out your on-premise directory and leave you in a state where your users can't really authenticate. They can't get access to resources that are required for them to do their jobs. Applications that are running CNC machines or whatever that may be tied into Active Directory, you can't get into those any longer. Pretty much everything stops at that point. Typically, those are ransomware attacks. Sometimes they're just denial of IT services, where they've wiped out the domain controllers in sort of a malicious way. And honestly, this also covers Active Directory encryption problems. There's a second kind of outage, and that's the biggest one. Those don't happen as frequently. Second kind of outage is when somebody makes a change to a user account. They remove them from a group that's critical for them to do their job. They change the data on a user account or on a group or a PC or whatever it might be, accidentally delete them. The data may be used on a user account to determine what groups they're in dynamically. We just had a medical organization where 4,400 medical first responders lost their Microsoft Teams, email, and everything because their user accounts were accidentally pulled out of a licensing group. Fortunately, they had us, and so they went, found out what the issue was right in our tool, and then instantly restored those. So they were only down for maybe 15, 20 minutes in that case. And then there's finally an existing solution. There are lots of existing solutions out there. You just heard from the folks at Metallic. You're going to hear from the folks at Acronis. There's Veeam. There's all sorts of backup for both on-premise and cloud. But there are two pieces that become very difficult, especially if they're just simply bare metal backups, just grabbing the data. You have to make sure you can do a clean recovery in an isolated lab or an isolated recovery environment without reinfection. If you're grabbing the entire server and it's been encrypted and you go to restore it, the encryption, the ransomware is still going to be there, or the corruption is still going to be there. And the idea is to get the business running as quickly as you can without any kind of delay. So we see cyber attack recovery actually happening in two steps. That's, first of all, getting your Microsoft identities back up and going immediately. That shouldn't take more than half an hour. Again, that's one of the things that we provide. And then we see you using traditional backup tools to, once you have the identities restored and working without reinfection, also without any kind of changes that led to the breach in the first place. Then the second is to use the traditional tools, which now can be authenticated. You can actually get to those servers again to use those methods and that data to recover those. So this is the solution that we have that takes care of all of that granular object level sort of tracking, change auditing, and recovery, plus the immediate full forest recovery. And the way we do this is pretty ingenious. We take just the data in Active Directory, just the structured data. We're backing that up continuously. And then when it comes time to recover that, you hit a button, and we build an isolated recovery lab inside of Azure AD, and we rebuild all your domain controllers using VMs that match in terms of capability, so that you immediately have whatever 1, 2, 3, 80, whatever you need in Azure, which means they're globally available very quickly. And so you have your full Active Directory infrastructure. Then all you have to do is do a cutover from your live network to our isolated lab once you've determined that you can bring those DCs down that were the ones that were infected. And this provides all of those capabilities in a simple to use interface. You can do multiple types of backups and multiple types of recoveries. So to test this, you click a button, we build a VM, we recover your last backup, right, or the last up-to-the-date data from Active Directory that we've gotten. And that means also, because we're able to recover and have such a small backup set of just the data, we can give you up-to-the-minute recoveries rather than having to go back a day or two when you find out that the encryption had already begun. Very quick to do. Within 5 or so, 10 minutes maybe at the most, you're going to have your DCs back. Some other customers who trust us for both change auditing, zero trust administration across your hybrid environment, and then also for immediate recovery. And just as a quick reminder, these are sort of the 3 areas that we play in. Great way to support zero trust from a management standpoint. Immediate recovery in case of ransomware for your Active Directory, get your folks up and running a lot faster, and also sort of pave the way for your recovery solution to do its job, bringing back your applications and data. And one of the things that people really kind of miss is the continuous change monitoring as well. That's sort of the center column we have here. We also look for changes in security that might indicate somebody is going to be attempting a breach. So we can look at very specific settings within Active Directory or within Azure Active Directory that may indicate somebody has a risk that is opening up. We can also look for settings that are not set correctly that might allow people to exploit some aspect of Active Directory and allow you to fix them before they become an issue. If you're interested in the product itself, we can do a pretty comprehensive demo, chaosoft.com/demo, pretty simple. There's also free trials. So if you just go to chaosoft.com/trial, you can download it and use it yourself. It is server-based. It does run on VMs in Azure or in Microsoft's marketplace. Good grief. We actually have a VM pre-built in the marketplace that will allow you to try it out without having to spin up your own servers, et cetera. And we have customers that run this in AWS. With that, I'm going to turn it over for some questions.
Thanks so much, Bob. Always great to have you with us. And obviously, this is such a huge issue for our audience, getting bigger every day, as you know. So really, really great to have this. We do have a number of questions coming in. Guys, go ahead and get your questions in. And we don't have time to get to Bob. We will get them to him later, so Bob will get your questions. But we'll go ahead and start with this. You talked about this a little bit in your presentation, but can you reiterate on how you handle making sure that you don't stay infected on the recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're looking at Active Directory, we assume the machines are viable. With a brick level, you're going to get all the OS components, right? Everything in the Windows Server comes along, and that's the entry point for most ransomware. We only get the components of Active Directory. So we actually look at Active Directory, get the database. That's not where infection is stored. It's on the OS level. So we get the Active Directory database plus all of the configuration details that are needed to replicate that domain controller. And so when we recover, we don't recover a full VM. We create a brand new VM, and then all the settings that are critical to make it act as a domain controller, we recover. So if you had additional applications loaded on there, we don't recover those. It's just the just the on-premise AD domain controller services.
Perfect.
Great question.
How does Chaosoft Guardian record changes?
Yeah, so we do what we call continuous directory protection. Most backup vendors will call it continuous data protection. We are literally watching Azure Active Directory, Office components like Exchange and SharePoint for security settings, and on-premise Active Directory at an object level. And that allows us to see changes, and we have an incremental stack of changes that also provides us instant rollback for object and attribute changes or group membership changes. And it provides us the ability to do the immediate recovery for domain controllers, forests, et cetera.
Okay, and then one more question, and guys, again, if we didn't get time for your questions, we will get them over to Bob. Can you talk a little bit more about how immediate Active Directory works?
Well, the immediate part just simply means that we have one button recovery. So once you have your backup plan set up, that is, in fact, on the forest recovery side or the domain recovery side, we actually have a backup plan where you choose sort of which domain controllers you want to back up. You might get all of them in one scenario. You might have one scenario for just testing your recovery. And then we have restore plans. And again, those can be one or more of your domain controllers. And when you go to restore them, you just have to click Run that plan. We go out, build the VMs automatically in Azure. That's our default, but you can also do them on-premise. And then once they're built, we recover that DC into that isolated lab. And it will act just like the domain controller you had on-premise that has now been infected or wiped out. So it's very simple. You don't have to know anything about setting up VMs, or you don't have to take the time to do all that. We just do that for you. And these are patent pending, by the way. This process we use is a patent pending process. Great question.
Okay, and then finally, and I know that you on your last slide you talked about it. So I don't know if you want to just go back there really fast. Just reiterate again how people can get their hands on the product.
Yeah, go to chaosoft.com if you want a demo, so that there's really no work other than sit back and watch TV or watch a web session with us. chaosoft.com/demo. If you want to try it, chaosoft.com/trial. If you have a question, it's chaosoft.com/question. Happy to assist in any way we can.
Bob, thanks so much for being with us today. It's lovely to have you back. Great to see you, and appreciate it.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.